Hey, neighbor.
How you doing?
Okay, how are you?
All right. You know, I had surgery on my elbow.
No.
Torn
Was
tennis
it,
elbow tendon, got repaired 3 to 6 months, but it's pretty good. It's only been like 10, 12. It's only been about 12 days, I think.
Wow. Was it
Yeah.
outpatient?
Yes, I didn't have to stay overnight.
Uh,
So I'm pretty happy.
yeah, I hope it fixes you for at least 3 or 4 decades.
So what happened? Any word on the Sheen today?
No, I stopped and Sean was right. There's quite an odor during the rain. So it's clearly something, most likely something draining. And those drains that come under the turf field, you know, have a number of inlets, including in that wetland behind Allen Avenue and Summer Street, behind the remodeled office building there.
Oh, where Paul Clark fell behind the school. Yeah. Okay.
They also drain the tennis courts, Summer Street, Spy Rock, I think.
I didn't smell it at, hi, Tom. I didn't smell it at, like before Sean at like 6:30ish this morning.
Morning?
But I did notice the water running. And like I said, and I think you got an email from me that I noticed that water running in the drought time, and I thought it was weird. And it's not common that it runs there, I don't think. But so
Another mystery calling for DPW detective work.
hmm.
Hi, Sue. Scott, Tom.
Hi, Steve.
Nice to see your face, Tom.
Yeah,
The entire, among the many things that didn't go quite right at the town meeting was that you weren't there.
I was diagnosed with bronchitis in the middle of the afternoon on Monday. So needless to say, Yeah, I was supposed to be there to help check people in and to run one of the microphones, but had to kind of tell Diane, nope, not happening.
Totally understand. Well, you sound pretty good. How are you feeling?
Heck of a lot better than Monday. It's
Good.
I actually only took a short nap in the middle of the day today.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going around. Come on. The weather turns cold, you know, you need a comfortable spot by the fire.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much I missed or how much I didn't miss. I'm not sure.
I don't think
Getting
you would.
varied reports.
I don't think you would have been pleased by most of what happened. Most people weren't. I wasn't.
I was working to talk along with Eli on his amendment and had another statement to make, but I'm glad that his amendment went through and it passed handily, which is good because without any actual reasons why you could recall people. I mean, I said this to some people, they said, well, that would never happen. I said, there's nothing in the bylaw to prevent it. I said, you could say, oh, we don't want anybody whose last name begins with K to run.
Right.
No, I mean, and I don't think too many people would sign it, but, well, a few would. But there's absolutely nothing that says that you can't come up with some unrealistic and absolutely wacko reason for recalling someone.
Yeah.
So,
Well, the crux of it, of course, was can you recall someone because they take what is technically an unpopular position and enact it.
yeah,
In fact, if the whole board does that.
I mean, there's absolutely no doubt what the reasoning behind it was, and that's why they didn't put any actual causation in their article.
Right.
I would like to think that they're that smart. I'm not sure, because you can tell that they took the article from some other town or city.
Mm-hmm. And stripped out the crimes and high crimes and misdemeanors that would normally be.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Scott, isn't this a fascinating rendition of Monday night's special town meeting, which kind of ended with a whimper after having collided with guardrails several times?
Sorry to hear that.
Well, on top of everything else, we have this voting system a lot of people use with remote control voting, which is supposed to be foolproof, idiot-proof, soundproof, waterproof. And it just didn't work. So
Oh, that's too bad.
when they got it, quote, fixed, which meant it would work in one of the rooms and not join the other room, there was significant skepticism about its accuracy.
About what, Steve?
About its accuracy
yeah,
in
yeah,
this
yeah.
era of election fraud claims. There you go. Well, folks, it's 7 o'clock and I see the turnout is pretty good. So thank you all for coming. It's been a busy week. So no penalties if you feel a little underprepared tonight. I certainly do. Anyone have any announcements, Sue or others, that we should handle up front?
I do not.
I suppose we should give you a very quick round of applause for getting the acoustics in room 7 or 5.
Well, it's not like I installed it or anything, so I'm I'm not sure. I just get the credit for making it happen.
Yes.
It
And
will.
also-
It does make a big difference. Chuck, Nate, and I met in there the other day, and it was a totally different experience. It was really good.
And thank you for sending the training information out from the training last Thursday.
You're very welcome.
So as you can see from the agenda that I have up on the screen, the focus of tonight is probably going to be our discussion of the proposals from Dana for monitoring wells. One proposal concerning Gravelly Pond, the other concerning the Lincoln Street well. Although we may get some updates from working groups and see how that emerges. So I anticipate a on-time completion, if not early. And you can all head out for Wednesday night football or whatever. So let's plunge right in. Sue, you distributed the latest version of these proposals
Why do I have this though?
with
I
the
did.
agenda, right?
I'm trying to figure
did.
this out.
Helen, are you here? Nice to hear your voice.
Oh, good to hear yours.
Is there
I,
anyone?
I s- I noticed you didn't sign the decision on the request for determination for the school, the athletic fields. So I wondered if you were away? Or
No, I voted against a negative determination on that.
Well, you're a busy guy, I know that.
No, I was all in on that. I thought this is a classic case of where an RDA is inappropriate, but we're talking out of school here. Let's get back to the subject. Is there anyone on the call who has not seen the updated versions of these proposals from Dana? Good, and I'll ask Dana to refresh our collective memories about them, and I'll take the agenda off in case Dana, you want to.
Steve, can I jump in here really quick?
Yes, by all means, Scott.
And Dan, I think you are here, which is great.
I am,
Dan, I have a map which I could put up here, just which might help. Unless you were going to do that, Dana, showing some of the proposed well locations. Should I do that?
No, go right ahead.
All right, I have to be enabled to share my screen.
Yes, let me let you have that valuable privilege. Okay,
All
you are
right,
enabled.
let's try
And
this.
while you're doing that, it's probably worth a mention of the report which you issued today, documenting the findings of the thermal work.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So maybe I'll start off, Dana, and then turn it over to you if that's okay. So this is,
Sure.
I think I showed this before. Let me just go down a little bit in the scale here so we can see everything. Start with Lincoln Street. We had proposed 2 wells here. One over on the west side. This is the Lincoln Street well in the middle. I should just sort of document what's here. I'm colorblind, just to remind everybody, but this colorized circle, and I'm not going to gamble on the color, is the 400-foot radius or the zone 1 around the well. And then you can kind of see another shaded colored area, which kind of heads off this area and up here. And that's the zone 2 area to the well. The simple definition of that is everything inside of zone 2 theoretically flows to the well under certain conditions, maximum pumping, low recharge, etc. See, this is a standard sort of protection method for wells in the state. We've based upon prior discussions and a quick field trip we did with Chuck and Nate and Steve and I walking around the area looking at maps. The athletic field at the high school was identified as something that we may want to evaluate. So we identified a well right next to that between the athletic field and the production well. So that's what this location is here. And then you may recall, we also had a prior discussion about the elementary school down on the south side of Lincoln Street well. And this aerial photo does not show the current building. So just keep that in mind. But there is a pretty large stormwater infiltration system where I've marked it about this location. And there is I think an agreement the school will not use sodium chloride. And you recall our prior discussions about sodium being elevated as a concern. But this well could be used to sort of track if in fact there is any sodium chloride coming from that area, as well as other pollutants. I'll also just mention, based on additional discussions we've had, it may be worth considering a 3rd well up in this area. If you can see where my cursor is, sort of the northwest of the well. This, of course, would be the area where the Essex County Golf Club is located. You can see the sand traps here and some of the golf holes. That would provide really, early warning, detection, and an assessment really from three directions around the well. So the current proposal, I think, just includes these two, but I just wanted to point out there may be a third potential. And maybe with that, Dana, I'll ask you to jump in and clarify or correct anything that I've said so far.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that sounds good. I think that's pretty much what we've discussed. And, that would give you, some sentinel wells as well as giving you current water quality information for what's going on now, and compare that to whatever your water quality results are from the Lincoln Street well as well.
Mhm.
And then Steve, we can either talk about these one by one, or I can jump over to Gravelly Pond, if that makes sense.
Let's see if there are any questions among the
Okay.
task force
Lincoln-
members about the Lincoln
Lincoln
Street
Street.
well.
Okay, sounds good.
So one which Ann Harrison raised, and I don't think she's here this evening, was how frequently should the monitoring wells be used to test? She noted that in the proposal, you're suggesting 2 testing times, although I couldn't tell whether they were just close to each other for purposes of validation, or whether you recommend we space them out.
Yeah.
What's your take on that, Dana?
Well, I think monitoring programs are kind of based on whatever the results of the initial testing are. So those 2 rounds of water quality data really are confirmation samples, just as you said. So the first set of samples give you an idea of what you may have, and then your second round just tells you, yeah, okay, we confirmed that was not an aberration, that was a valid measurement. And then if you do find that there is something of concern there, then you could set up a quarterly or 3 times a year type of evaluation, which is a pretty typical monitoring schedule.
Thank you. Chuck, I see your hand up first. Unmute and
Yep. So just a couple follow-ups on kind of what we do at Lincoln Street currently is, about, I'd say a year ago, we, noticed the uptick on the sodium. And so we've been sampling monthly already. So as soon as these go in, I would recommend that we sample monthly as well, so we can compare it to what we're getting at the well itself. And then I'm not sure what the current time frame or how far out the drillers would be, but if we could get that information in the winter, I think it'd be more useful than waiting till next spring. But
Yeah.
so that's kind of just thoughts off the top of my head as people were talking. And then we can decide if there's other constituents or panels that we want to take. But for sodium, I think that's where I would go with it.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
thank you, Chuck. Gordon, you're next.
Thanks. I like the idea of having sort of sentinel wells around the main water source, and I'm still just curious whether it's worth moving the blue well near the school or putting something else closer to Lincoln Street to be between the gas station and the main well, just in case there were ever to be anything coming that way. But again, you'd have to commit to doing regular monitoring there to try to catch something, I guess.
I have a question. I haven't looked at what the situation is at the gas station, but perhaps has there ever been any monitoring well installation around the gas station itself that you could use those wells to see if there's anything going on, or if it's just a premonition that there might be some issues with
There
it?
is there is a well up Summer Street where there was previously a gas station, and there was Tom, you may remember this better than I think there was a fuel tank rupture there at one point. So the well is partly for removal of contaminants.
There's several wells at that other site, that are in the state database, and you know, and actually the blue dot you have there is probably between that site and our current well. The one I was curious about was to the slightly to the right. So if Scott were to scroll down just a little bit, we could pinpoint. Yeah, it's where Lincoln Street hits that, yeah, right in that area. And, you know, I don't know of any issue with that gas station. This just sort of, this worry of mine just comes from having known somebody who does groundwater testing for petroleum companies, and she once warned us, you know, to be careful about
Yeah.
gas stations. So that was my, you know, I don't think I know anything about this particular station. I just was curious if we could
Okay.
get an early warning for a future
Yeah, and
event.
I'll just jump in here and mention that we're talking about at least now 3 different potential sources and types of contaminants. So back to the frequency of testing and also what we're testing, because this well at the elementary school was originally designed to monitor sodium. This well was really originally thought to see if we can determine if in fact there's any PFAS moving from this synthetic field. But of course, these wells can really be sampled for anything. And so I think that maybe what we want to give some thought to is not only frequency of sampling, but also what we're sampling. And we can certainly come back with some recommendations, but clearly a first step is to get the wells in there. And I think we could, you know, provide some further consideration of this location down here, Gordon. You did mention that last time. And we could potentially get another well somewhere there, but maybe we could review those files that are available on the gas station first.
Mhm, mhm.
All right, thank you.
All right, Nate? Oh, I'm sorry, John Round, you, welcome, and you have had your hand up a while.
Thank you. Didn't want Nate to jump the line here.
All right,
So this is for early detection. Given the 2 wells that are shown here, which seem to be about maybe 300 and 400 feet out, how much time, given groundwater flow, et cetera, what other factors, are we talking about when we see something there before it would show up in our drinking water?
Well, John, I'll take a first crack at that. I think these wells are the purpose is not only early detection, but also to document. Sorry.
go ahead, Scott.
Or document, you know, sources. As I said, the athletic field, really just to figure out. We've done some research. I know your committee has as well, and there's not a lot of data out there confirming or not confirming whether or not these synthetic fields, in fact, are contaminating groundwater with PFAS. So that this would be, I think, a good way to do that. Not so much for early warning, but just to determine, is it in fact coming from there? And on the southern well here, this is really, as I said, not to early determine sodium coming to the well, but if in fact it might be coming from the elementary school site, given their our understanding that they're not using sodium chloride there. So I think those wells, you know, really are multi-purpose, not just early warning, but also, you know, essentially determination or not, whether or not there are sources in that direction. To answer your question, the time of travel, it's a good question, John. And the time of travel between these locations and the well really is dependent quite a bit on the pumping rate of the well, because that will lower the water table, increase the gradient to the well, but probably, you know, a standard number that's used is 1 foot per day under non-pumping conditions. So non-pumping, these might be 300 or 400 days, but I think under pumping, that could be a lot less than that, maybe, you know, in the order of weeks or a couple, 3 months. Dan, I don't know if you want to add to that, but that would be my assessment of the timing.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that you could definitely accelerate that with the pumping, but without knowing what the gradient is, you know, that should that would be another good desktop evaluation as we put this design together, is to figure out what the travel time could be. But, you know, I would say probably 30 to 40 days would be more likely, unless you've really got a lot of drawdown. So
Okay, I mean, that's not enough time to say, okay, we're going to take some drastic measures or something. So I'd say the first reason is probably a more useful, a more useful use of the result terms of knowing that something's going on and investigating more about how and why and what. But it seems to me that with only 30 or 40 days, well, it's going to make its way into the water supply one way or the other, before you are able
Well,
to do much of anything.
John, I'll just jump in again if I may, Steve. The other value of early warning is not so much remediation, but it would be possible for Chuck and Nate to shut the way. If we see something significant, they could moderate the pumping rate all the way down to shutting it down.
Mhm.
In fact, so there are some other measures that the town could employ as an early warning technique. But again, my original suggestion here was not so much early warning, but more documentation of sources.
Okay.
Well put. Thank
All
you.
three are reasonable responses.
Nate, if your hand is still up, which I'm not sure about. Speak
Yeah, I
up.
was just gonna say, I have the DEP MCP website pulled up. If I can screen share, I can show kind of, they have a website where it tracks every waste site and reportable release. So I have that pulled up for generally around the Lincoln Street area.
Yes, please.
If you want to see that.
Go ahead, Nate.
Everyone can see that?
Mhm.
Mhm.
So it does look like we have a number of closed sites, in somewhat close vicinity. This one right here, I guess, is the old Texaco station, which you can click on. And if you follow this link, it'll show you like all the details on what the release was, how many gallons of what type of fuel. This was a residential, heating oil release. Or was some other ones. There's one that was for the train tracks. There was a hydraulic leak. But basically you can go to the, DEP website data portal and search all of this if anyone's curious, wants to look into, more of these. But just thought I'd share that for information.
Does open site mean anything significant in this? In that scale?
So it's just still an active, it's a site that has not been closed out. It could mean that it's just paper, on the paperwork end. The only one that I can think of that was of, relatively recently was the one on the end of Central and Pine Street. That was, I think, 2 years ago. That was a heating oil release.
Nate, what is the open one at the corner of Allen and Brook?
Let's see.
And I'll explain in a minute why I'm asking.
Yeah, so that's an old one. That's from 1996.
Okay.
120 days. So that's a long lead.
Looks like gasoline type
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yep.
So the reason I'm asking is that that sheen on Sawmill was back, and now there can be no doubt it's not painting because there's no painting going on anymore. And educated guess is that it's coming through the drains that come underneath turf field at Coach Field. But where it originates, who knows? But that's a little pocket wetland in there behind.
Yeah.
As you know, well, it's actually across Allen Avenue from there, behind Summer Street. Okay, thank you. That is helpful.
Yep.
Other questions about Lincoln Street well?
Yeah.
I'm not seeing any, so let's move on to.
Yeah, I have a question. Let's see.
Oh, go ahead, Randy.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm having trouble with my system again. So I just had a couple of questions, I guess, for Scott. So I took a look at the proposal that you prepared and was wondering how you would propose, what you would propose if any of the concentrations in any of the wells exceeded triggering notifications for the MCP?
Well, I am not a licensed site professional, so I need to be careful about recommending any follow-up actions on contaminant levels found. But again, on the athletic field side, the idea was just to see if, in fact, PFAS was present relative to that synthetic turf. But I guess if your question is, what do we do with the results if in fact they're high? I know that Nate and Chuck have been dealing with this on other sites. I don't want to put them on the spot, but maybe they could share their perspective on this a little bit. But it is a good question. Again, on the elementary school location to the south here, my intent was really to look at sodium, which would not be a reportable contaminant under the MCP.
Yeah, because basically if you have a concentrations that triggers the reporting concentrations, you would need to report, report it as a hazardous waste site. And it goes into the waste site cleanup system.
Right.
And it,
Right, and
yeah, because the PFAS reporting concentrations are extremely low at this point.
yes, as we've heard, and likely to get, in fact, lower in effect.
Yeah.
As the EPA rolls out its plans. Just relative to the two turf fields, and many of you may know this already, it was what Helen Bethel was mentioning at the start of the meeting. The school district has, and the school committee have voted to remove and replace the turf because it's aged out in both fields, and I'm not sure what the timetable for that is, but it's being done with an assurance that the new material will be specifically tested to show no measurable PFAS results for I think the top 20 or 25 PFAS compounds recognized by EPA and the DEP. Which doesn't mean that if the old field was actually leaching something like that, it would disappear in a flash. From what Scott has taught us, I think we know that groundwater has its own little mysteries for persistence and slow movement and other things. Is anybody more up to date on the schedule for that work than I am? I suspect it'll be a summertime thing, but I can't be sure. Okay. Let's
No,
move over to, oh, yeah.
Actually, when they filed it, they said they were going to do the work next summer.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you, Helen.
You're welcome.
Let's move over to Gravelly and the proposal for monitoring there.
Yeah. Oh, so let me just again introduce the site, and then and I'm going to zero in here. This is the map we're looking at is one that I did think I showed you before. This is our in progress map, which I recognize is hard to read. We're looking at trying to answer the question, where does the water come from that gets to Gravelly Pond for the purpose of amending the protection zone. And I won't spend a lot of time unless you want to go over that again, but I just wanted to explain sort of what you're looking at. What I'm going to do for the purpose of that discussion is zoom in here a little bit and focus on the near shore area around Gravelly Pond. So this black line here is the watershed delineation, which determines the surface water flow to the pond. And what Dana and I have been focusing on with our thermal survey work and just looking at other resources is, where does the groundwater come from? And this, again, I'm colorblind, this shaded area, somebody help me with the color here.
Green.
Green, thank you, Steve, is our sand and gravel deposits that are highly permeable. And you can see that they are all the way around the pond to some degree, but the larger deposits are really a little bit up here in the northwest, and then this area on the east, where we think there's likely more groundwater contribution. And by the way, that does seem to match up quite well with our preliminary results of our thermal survey. That's where we found the largest signal, thermal gradient signal. So the other well that we had talked about was out in this area on the northeast east side of the pond. We don't have it on this map, but Dana, would this be approximately the right location where my cursor is?
Yes, it's actually, the location would probably be hidden behind that label for the MW6S and D.
Right in here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and the original intent of that was really just to, look at what might be coming in from that side of the pond or the watershed. But, frankly, I think we're maybe as much or more interested in determining where the overall contribution area is. So this well, I think is something we can discuss whether or not the town wants to move forward with it or not. I think what we're trying to focus on is identifying how much of this sand and gravel area that I'm outlining, in fact, does flow to Gravelly Pond. We do have some mapping of groundwater flow at both the Hamilton landfill, which is approximately here, as well as the Manchester landfill down here. And so we've got some indication on groundwater flow in those two areas, but I think what Dan and I are talking about, what we can do to supplement that information to get a better definition of what we call groundwater contributing areas to Gravelly Pond, which frankly, I think we're quite convinced does go beyond this surface watershed.
It's got those yellow and purple dots, which you probably can't distinguish.
Yes, I can see those. Yeah, those are
monitoring wells.
Those are. Thank you, Steve. Those are existing monitoring well locations at the two landfills. That's right.
And those are required by state
Yes,
law and regulation.
that's right.
Got it. All right, questions, comments?
Couple questions from here, Steve. Dana, I noticed that you talk about that the driller's charge is not included in the estimate or in the contract that we're asked to look at. What do you think the driller costs will be, or is it difficult to estimate that?
Actually, the driller's cost is included in the estimate. I think what you're seeing is the fact that what I try to do is ask clients to pay that directly rather than have me do the pay the subcontractors, just to keep me from charging you an additional 10% on top of their fees. So yes, that amount that you see there does include the drilling. And what I've done is assume that originally what we talked about was having 2 wells at Lincoln Street and 2 wells at Gravelly Pond. And my assumption was that we could get that work done in one day. So we were splitting the cost between those 2 sites. So if there's some additional work that's going to be done at Lincoln Street, that could push those proposals a little bit farther away from each other. But, there might be slightly more drilling costs at Lincoln Street than Gravelly Pond. But yes, both the water quality is included, the drilling is included, and the oversight and the sampling manpower is all included in that estimate.
Okay, so the laboratory stuff is also included, but it's included with the understanding that we would pay the laboratory directly.
Exactly.
And
This is a question from someone who's not too knowledgeable about how much water testing costs. For example, I look at list number 2 and it lists 25 different PFAS tests. Are all those 25 tests done for $250? Or are they $250 for each test?
They are for all those constituents. So when there's an analysis done, the piece of equipment that does the analysis for that particular group of compounds will give you that range. There are 2 or 3 different tests that are fairly common, and some give you some of the constituents, some give you others. So this particular one that was selected gives you everything that the Mass DEP wants to see, plus some additional compounds, because there's a lot of different subspecies of PFAS chemicals.
Well, thank you. That's, those are wonderful answers to hear.
Okay.
Everything on the shorter list is also included on the longer list, correct?
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, good questions, Tom. Anyone else? I mean, this one for me, and I think you, Scott, you were referring to this. These raise a more significant question of, so what would we do if we detect significant groundwater flow from the east, from the landfill, either or both ours or Hamilton's, and we find that some of the, what we believe are pretty heavy concentrations of PFAS right around our own landfill are in fact entering the groundwater that's traveling toward Gravelly. As far as I know, and Chuck or Nate, Scott, anybody correct me here, there's no easy remediation for that problem, is there? Chuck?
No, certainly not.
Okay.
I think, yeah, not in situ for sure.
Right. And Scott, were you, in the interest of understanding the overall groundwater flow and contribution to Gravelly, were you ever considering monitoring wells to the northwest or west of Gravelly, or other methods?
Well,
you mentioned several to me.
Yeah, as you can see, this area on the west side of the pond, the reservoir, is already included in the zone 2. This hatched area is the zone 2 to the Round Pond well, which is located here. And then everything inside the black area is already included as watersheds. So I don't see the need, at least at this point, for additional groundwater mapping there, simply because if our objective here is to determine protection areas, that side of the pond is already protected, if you will, or mapped as a protection area because of those other delineations. That was at least my rationale so far. Whereas on the east side here, the only thing we have is this watershed delineation, which again is surface water flow. And I just, as background, I'll add that for quite a long time within the industry, and I mean in the hydrology industry, many people have assumed that groundwater flows similar to surface watersheds. So many people have just mapped surface watersheds and then assumed the groundwater behaves the same as this. But I've spent years on training courses for EPA suggesting that that's not always the case. So, and I think this is a good example of that. So I think it's worth thinking outside the box, if you will, or thinking out the watershed. But I think, to your question, Steve, I think the more important unanswered questions are on the east side, in my opinion, because of the already mapped protection areas on the west side.
Yeah. And just to build on that a little bit, through a great deal of foresight a long time ago, the town of Manchester owns most of that land, including Round Pond, to the west, and we do not own very much to the east of Gravelly Pond, which means that it's going to be very unlikely that residential or commercial industrial development would happen in that area to the west of the pond, top of which it's rife with wetland.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, Francie, your hand is up.
I wondered if it's at all reassuring that up to now tests for PFAS in Gravelly Pond have shown little or zero level of PFAS. And these, I don't see here, but I did at our last meeting where 2 new monitoring wells would be placed. Would they be closer to Gravelly Pond and therefore, you know, would help us see what's coming? Or are they closer to the landfill? I assume closer to the water.
So France, I can answer the question. The proposed location of the well, I think Dana said it was actually underneath this label, but it would be closer to the pond than these 2 existing wells on the Hamilton landfill. These wells are, I believe, on the landfill site owned by the town of Hamilton. I get one of the considerations of putting a well on this side of the, I think fair to say this side of the street also would be on Manchester land, controlled land. So it would provide more freedom, I guess, to sample that well.
Oh, yes, that's right.
But it would be, to answer your question, it would be west between these wells and the pond, somewhere where my cursor is, if you can see that.
Yeah, I forgot that we couldn't monitor their wells. So these are our own. Yeah, thanks.
Yes, and for the reasons that Chuck and Randy have each mentioned, you know, there are consequences to reporting levels of PFAS or other regulated contaminants that are above the standards, the MCP.
Yeah.
Gordon?
Thanks. So if I'm understanding correctly, these 2 new wells would help you understand flow that you suspect is coming from the Landhill area towards the pond. You would be able to then establish that that area should be hatched as a groundwater source into the. Can you just explain what that would mean, and what sort of protection would that afford going forward, since these are already?
Gordon, I'm glad you asked that question, because I think this needs clarification. So,
Okay.
I think when we first thought about this well, it was, as you're suggesting, just to determine, you know, to further document the thermal measurements we've done in the pond. However, looking at the groundwater mapping data from the Hamilton landfill, which includes all of these wells, it's pretty clear, at least in this area, that the flow is westerly towards Gravelly Pond, or I should say that's what instead of clear, I should just say that's what the data suggests. So therefore, this well that we've been talking about really probably is unnecessary for that purpose. So then the remaining purpose, if in fact you installed the well, would really be to document whether or not contaminants are moving further from these locations on the landfill towards Gravelly Pond. The other objective that I was talking about earlier of mapping, and I'll just move this a little bit better, the groundwater flow throughout this area, I think is better served by other field investigations, which Dana and I are currently talking about, and we'll come back to you with some ideas. But I don't, just to be clear, I don't think we need this well for that purpose. Now that we know, you know, having reviewed the landfill data, which is already suggesting the flow is from these wells where I'm pointing to, that the groundwater mapping is suggesting that flow is westerly towards the pond. So I think the real only value of this well, I mean, it's not more wells. Any hydrologist is going to tell you more wells are better. Okay. However, I think it's fair to say that we kind of already know the direction of flow there. So the real utility of that well would be, as I said a few minutes ago, if the town wanted to have the option of doing whatever sampling they wanted to do in their own well, rather than relying on wells within the town of Hamilton's facility. And
Okay,
I think for the purpose of the mapping, I'd rather propose other investigations at a later date.
Okay, so that's really helpful. So that this decision comes down to, do we want to be sampling from this site at our own, whenever we feel like it? Would you still recommend 2 wells at different depths here? Because I thought I understood from the last time that the 2 different depths was, again, to help with the flow calculation. could you just have a single well if all you wanted to do was sample?
Dana, do you want to answer
I
that?
can speak to that, yeah. So from looking at the Hamilton landfill data so far, there are 2 wells that are at the MW6S and D location. And one is a shallow well, it's in the sand and gravel material, and the deeper well is actually in shallow bedrock. So the 2 things that will be allowed with this pair of wells, if you decide to put them in adjacent to Gravelly Pond, if the flow from the landfill is discharging towards the pond, you'll be able to see how deep that contamination goes, because the landfill is at a high point. And I think in the memo, I added a few figures which may help in kind of understanding how groundwater flows from higher spots to lower spots. But the 2 wells will show you not only in which direction vertically is the flow happening, because you can compare the measurements in the 2 wells and get a vertical flow estimate, but you'll also be able to get the water quality at 2 different depths. And the bedrock well, the shallow bedrock well, and that overburden well that's up gradient do show both have some contaminants that appear to be landfill related contaminants. So it would just mirror the 2 up gradient wells if you put 2 wells down gradient.
And I just want to add one thing here. There are all kinds of different groundwater contaminants, and one way to classify them, and I'll use some simple terms, are floaters, mixers, and sinkers. And what that means is some contaminants, and I'll use oil as an example, float on the surface of the water table. Other stuff, like some of the chlorinated hydrocarbons, will sink to the bottom of the aquifer. And then thirdly, the so-called mixers move with the groundwater. So with a site like a landfill, you usually have sort of all of the above as potential contaminants. So I think if that is a goal or an objective of the town, it would definitely make sense to have multiple levels.
And if I can just ask one more question, because when you started talking, Dana, that it sort of triggered something. So you mentioned that there's 2 depths of that MW6, sorry, shallow and deep, and the deeper one was in some bedrock. And we know that from about where that well is towards the lake, the surface dives pretty quickly down to the level of the lake. And so this map is clearly showing like that, whatever that top layer constituent is sand and gravel. Do you guys have data on where the bedrock is here relative to the height of the pond and things like that? Sort of the 3D topology of this area? Because
No, at this point, we don't have that information. I mean, that's one thing that you'll be able to glean from doing this well, because I don't have the exact number on the top of my head, but I believe the depth to the bedrock was 35 or so feet below the land surface. That road, this well is right on the road, so on the east side of the road.
yeah.
So
I mean, the interesting thing is that could very well be above the level of the pond. So it,
yeah,
yeah.
it could be. So that there's about a 20-foot drop in elevation between where the road is and where the proposed well pair would be too. So you kind of have to determine, where are you going to run into bedrock? And we really don't know until the well is installed. But that's one thing that you would do, is you usually drill the deepest well first, kind of find out where the strata are, and then you plan your second well.
All right, thank you.
Well, I guess I'd like to hear from anybody who feels that there's some reason in the short term, say in the next year to 5 years, to put in these 2 wells as proposed. And I'm choosing the short-term time frame because it's easier to think about than the time frame we sort of carved out for ourselves here, which is the next number of decades, up to maybe 50 years. But it is also worth thinking about the viability of Gravelly Pond over the long term, given what we're hearing tonight and have been hearing for a while about the likely groundwater contribution to it from the landfills. So is there anybody around the table who feels strongly that we should be doing these two? Peter? Peter Colarusso? You will need to unmute.
There we go. Much better, right?
Right. Welcome.
Thank you. Would it make sense to wait to see what the EPA regs are in December, which may influence our decision on the urgency of putting these wells in?
Say a little more about how you think that would influence the decision.
Well, let's say they are lowering the limits, and that information on where the PFAs are coming from and how much they're coming in, and then what Chuck's going to do about it and when he has to do it, may influence when and how quickly we need to get that data. I mean, we know they're going to be more rigorous. We don't know how much more rigorous, hopefully not outrageous. But another month, we'll know what we're going to have to be dealing with from a regulatory point of view. And then we'll know how much flexibility we have or leeway we have.
And the current levels, Chuck or others in Gravelly Pond are in the single digits for the measurable DEP standards. Is that right?
Yeah, we've been under 10 in the pond throughout our testing. So yeah, and the whisper number that I've heard in drinking water circles is 10 for PFOS and PFOA, so not the 6 that Mass is doing. I have no idea if that's just rumor or well-based sources, but either way, it seems like the pond is still least of our concerns for the immediate future, and it's what we do with the well, because we have been under the 20 for Mass at the well, but if we have to get to 10 for PFOS and PFOA, we are over that. So we will be shutting off the well and adding treatment if that comes to fruition. So just another kind of thing that I've been thinking about a lot more recently is that aspect of it. So I don't know that for the purposes of PFAS and the existing regs or the next set of regs, I don't know that these wells help in any of that, at least not in the immediate short term. Probably just make it muddier because we would end up doing more sampling and more testing and being responsible for more water than what's just in the pond.
Kind of a donut. Oh, right.
That's my working theory. I'm not sure I have a fully fleshed out plan yet.
Similar you had, Chuck. So, maybe the focus needs to be on the well for now.
Jeff?
I didn't understand the last thing that Chuck just said. You don't think there's a point in putting a well in Gravelly because it'll muddy the waters? It's too complicated to sample or something?
No. I guess bad analogy or bad pun. No, I think the act of putting wells there is not difficult. The idea of what information you get out of them and what you need to do with that information is less clear to me.
Okay.
And so that's why I've backed off thinking that those wells are a good idea in the short term. Over the long haul, maybe they're like we were talking about before, maybe they're centering wells or they're a proxy for some other constituent, or, there's just in, the groundwater flow and all those things, those all make sense to me. But in terms of sampling for PFAS and the current regs or, the future regs, I'm less convinced that we need those wells.
Okay, I have my hand up, so I'll say what I was thinking. I think we should put the Gravelly Pond well in, because I think we'll be able to monitor and it'll give us some heads up over the long term, for the reasons that were already said. Confirmed contaminant flow. It'll be our well. The protection area, I think we're talking about maybe extending the protection area to that direction, and this data would help that. And the vertical flow that Dana just referred to. So my current opinion is Gravelly Pond well is a good idea. I'm not in favor of the Lincoln Street wells, because the golf course that we talked about, I don't think there's any point in putting one there. That's 120 degrees. It could be coming from anywhere. A point well there doesn't seem to make sense to me. I don't think we get any significant early detection. The streets that are in the area, incidents on those streets are as much of a danger as anything that we're trying to look at with the field or the school or anything else, in my opinion. The high school turf is going to change soon. So yes, we could monitor the construction of that, but theoretically we're putting a better situation in. And there's nothing we can do if it comes from the recent memorial construction. That's underground. They have that whole underground water containment thing there. I don't see what we can do from that spot. And we're going to add treatment for PFAS regardless to the Lincoln Street well, it seems to me. So I just don't see the point in spending $20,000 to monitor in that area.
Mhm. Thank you. John?
Yeah, so I've got a question. The two existing wells that are in the vicinity of the wells that we want to drill here belong to Hamilton. Do we know that, I mean, if we were to approach Hamilton and say, can we sample your wells? I don't know that that's been done, but what happens? Would they be cooperative with all of that? And would anything that we get from the wells that already exist there, would that be close to what we would get if we had to drill new wells? I'm just wondering if the money has to be spent, if you've got some wells that you can probably work with, but people have to be cooperative to make that work. Or are we dealing in a location for these other wells for which the existing wells just is not going to give us the answers we want? I mean, I'm just looking at the map here, and I don't see that there's a great deal of distance or difference between where those existing wells are and the new wells would be drilled. And I don't know who can answer that.
I'll start on the first end with Hamilton. So I have reached out to the director in Hamilton. I haven't made contact yet, but I suspect that he will not be receptive to us sampling those wells for anything besides what they already have to sample, which I think that information is public record, and they've been willing to give it to us in the past. So I don't foresee any issues getting the data from those existing wells that is already existing, but they're not going to let us sample for PFAS, would be my guess.
So they're not looking at PFAS. They're not looking at PFAS.
Not currently. It might be that our permits change and we have to start monitoring PFAS at these kind of landfill areas, but currently it's not. So they would not allow us to, for the reasons that we've said. That if they find it, then they have to deal with it.
Understood.
So I think that's that's kind of where I stand with these wells. Is we would be looking for a problem to solve, and we have plenty of problems that we already know exist that we need to solve. So, and then I would say, going back to one of the comments Jeff made about the expanding the protection zone, that makes sense at some level. I don't know that it's urgent, because these landfill areas are not going to be developed in any reasonable fashion, they're all wetlands on most sides of them and in buffers. So it'd be a pretty big heavy lift at this general location. So I don't know that it's an immediate need. So I guess we can go
Yeah.
from there.
Well, all right. Well, I do agree that if PFAS were leaching from those two dump areas, it would have already started to happen because they've been around for a long time. So there'd have to be some sort of a disturbance that would create that happening, I would think. Otherwise, it's at a more or less a steady state.
True, but John, there may be few other potential sources of PFAS.
Oh, elsewhere, no question. Yeah.
Yeah. In Lincoln Street, we have a real unsolvable detective mystery because there's so many potential sources and types of even litter and whatnot.
Mhm.
But in Gravelly, again, thanks to foresight, we've kept much of the area around Gravelly pristine, so to speak. No development, no paving, other than drilling of wells, no construction. Except on that side. And just to an earlier point, I'm looking at the topo map zoomed in, and it looks like the landfill most proximate, the Hamilton landfill, is 90 to 100 feet, a little more than 100 feet above sea level. The road is around 70, and the pond, I think, is around 50. That's kind of a 20 to 30 foot grading difference from the landfill to the road, and another 20 feet down to the pond. Peter, are you
Yeah, I have a
another
question.
comment?
I have a question for Chuck. I think he answered this already in a prior meeting, but I'm hearing numbers similar to what Chuck is hearing for the December announcement, which means, we got to do something at the well. Unless Chuck is aware of a way to prevent the source from getting to the well, what difference does it make where it's coming from if we can't stop it from coming to the well? Let's just focus on fixing the problem. And as far as Gravelly Pond goes, I don't know if we want to know the answer to that, because if it comes back and you have a well and it's at 10, you just created another problem. And we don't have one now because the levels at the Gravelly Pond are low. Is that correct, Chuck, or am I off base here?
That's right on.
Yeah, I think you're right on there, Peter.
Hey, Steve, if I may.
Yes, Scott.
The only other thought I would just put into this discussion, which is a great discussion. I think these are all really good points. Back to Lincoln Street. I think one other value of at least the athletic field sampling, if in fact that is confirmed as a likely source, and if the town is going to remove that field, that may preclude, and again, this is a lot of questions here, may preclude the need for treatment at that site, possibly, if that determines to be a major or the major source. And I don't know, I'm not suggesting that we know that's the case, but that is one other advantage, I think, of doing that sampling, or could be.
Thanks. Jessica?
Yeah, I'm just, this is kind of the second meeting. I'm a little bit coming away feeling like our contaminants group, which has been all about looking for sources of contamination. And it's just kind of feeling more and more like, does it even matter? We're just treating things. And so it's, I don't know, I'm someone who likes to kind of look for the source and understand and see what we can do, but I understand it's money. But yeah, this is sort of the second meeting in a row I'm feeling like, wait a minute, this is what those of us on contaminants have been working on for months here. And is it not anything worthwhile? So I guess it's a thought, not necessarily a question, but yeah.
Yeah, I feel your pain. It's a good point.
If I can just, can I make just a comment on that?
Yes, please.
I totally understand what you're saying. If you're going to have to do treatment, especially for something as tough as PFAS, the advantage of knowing where a source might be coming from is if it's going to continue to be a problem and it is something that can be cleaned up. And I'm not saying that, you know, if it's PFAS, that's a whole different story. But if there are some issues that can be addressed, then at least you have a better sense of where those problems are and what kind of potential they have for continuing to contaminate into the future. So those are just some of the thoughts on the value of putting in some wells and really getting a baseline of what's coming from outside the pumping zone.
Thank you. Gordon, then Peter, and then I'd like to know if the group is ready for a decision or wants to mull on this some more. Gordon.
Yeah, thanks. Sort of along the lines of what Jessica was saying, I guess I feel a need to, you know, thank you guys for putting the proposals together, because I know you spent a lot of time on this, and I know our group has been sort of asking, what can we do to figure out where these sources are? And I think you've provided us with these options of potential things. But I have to say, I think I am leaning towards the direction of not knowing if the expense is worth it right at this moment, because I'm not sure that we really have actionable things that we can do. But the exception that I want to make to this is that I do think, you know, in the case of Lincoln Street, I agree. If we have to treat, we have to treat. You know, we're kind of near the limit there now. So maybe this is not so actionable, but I like the idea that if you can figure out that it's coming from the field, we can maybe as a town choose to do different things with that field. In the case of Gravelly Pond, you know, I feel like this impacts what this whole team is here for, right? To sort of figure out, is this a water source that is going to be in jeopardy in the future? And do we need to start looking for other water sources or other ways of treating this if we feel like things are coming from that direction? But my gut, I have to say, feels like probably it's not coming from there, given that this landfill has been here for so long. So again, I'm, you know, I like the idea of getting more data. I'm just not convinced right now that we're going to have something actionable to do. But my final decision really rests on remaining confusion about this being brought up, that what if you measure something that is above contaminant levels? Because these are monitoring wells. These are not water supplies for the public. And so I don't understand the legal ramifications of what it means to put a monitoring well either within the wellhead protection area at Lincoln Street or right next to the pond, and you find something above threshold. Does it mean a lot more paperwork for our DPW? Does it mean we need to do something about it? It's not the drinking water. It's just another site. So that to me is still a confusion. I understand that it keeps getting brought up, but I still don't understand what the ramifications are. And that's, I think, what's preventing me from saying, you know, definitely go ahead with this right now, because I don't understand the answer to that question.
Can anybody succinctly answer that, Randy or Chuck or Nate?
Yeah, I can answer that. If it's above reporting thresholds, you would need to report under the MCP. and
Right,
that
I
would
understand
trigger
that. It's been
hazardous
mentioned,
waste.
but what does that mean?
So it would
Paperwork,
trigger
yeah?
a hazardous waste site condition. That
And then
means you
what-
have to go through the whole process of investigating and cleaning up that hazardous waste site.
It would be a quite expensive process for us
Okay.
to undertake that. You know, we'd be
Okay.
enlisting LSPs, you know, full consulting to do
Okay.
delineation, site investigation, delineations, and then, you know, if you look at the, you know, for the burn dump, it'd be very similar to that type of, you know, what they had to do there. You know,
Okay.
that kind of process.
Gotcha. So I think that's the answer we need right now. And that holds both for the Lincoln Street well, monitoring well too, if it were PFAS, right?
Right. If we sampled for PFAS, you know, it wells around there and it came back high, or, you know, reportable limit, yeah, we would have to follow those guidelines.
And that would also be true for our drinking well there if that were above that level soon, right?
Correct. Right. Right.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Jessica,
Well, now I'm confused again too, because we're talking kind of just about PFAS, but we would not only be I mean, we were talking for Lincoln Street about trying to maybe understand where the sodium's coming from as well. So now I'm feeling like, as always, we get down the PFAS rabbit hole, and are we missing out on some other information we could be getting if we didn't do these wells?
You could certainly do the wells and test for, innocuous or things that don't have reporting limits, like sodium, so you could do those. And, correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, but that could give you an indication of, groundwater direction from those, correct? Or, if you, with a limited testing data.
Yeah, I think that's true. And again, that objective was really related to are the management recommendations of using no sodium deicers actually being followed? And then, that could be used as a method to, discuss with the school or whoever it is to make sure that happens. And so that would be a non-reporting, but it would also provide additional data on direction of flow, correct?
all right. Well, my sense is that we are not prepared to vote, certainly not in favor of these proposals at present. Do I have that right? Anybody vigorously object to that? So one thing we can do is take Peter's counsel and wait and see just how strict the DEP recommends. Of course, the DEP doesn't regulate our water. The EPA doesn't regulate our water. The DEP has to convert those into state standards. And can anybody guess how long that will take? It's clearly not going to happen in December when the EPA issues.
So I think they would, if it's more strict than the state, I think that they would, because I think they have or maybe I'm thinking the wastewater, but I wouldn't be surprised for that one. It doesn't take as long as you think.
Okay, so they may feel an imperative to move.
Yeah.
Well, we'll find out soon enough. Well, let me join several of you in thanking Dana in particular and Scott also for the hard work on these. They're not we're not binning them. We're just tabling them. Is my view on this. And also for pulling together the technical memo on your findings from thermal, which are far more extensive, thanks to Jeff Koshan and others, than we expected. At very little incremental cost, right, Jeff? You were working fairly cheap.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, it's cheap.
Yeah, we got we got more than we paid for. Let me ask if there are updates from the working groups. I think John and I can report that not much has been done, although we have really good intentions on the question of the relationship between rate levels and rate tiers and conservation. But I'll make the point again tonight that question is inextricably related to the questions we're asking about the well, the pond, and the round pond wells, because we have not been particularly careful or cautious in our use of water and how we encourage our neighbors to use water. And it's not inconceivable that we don't need all of the current resources that we have if we become effective, if our citizens become effective conservers of water, particularly in the summer. Contaminants, I believe you've had a meeting. Anything to report from that?
Yeah, I mean, just as was the case at the last meeting, we've been working on trying to pull all our work together into one easy to read document. So we're still working our way through that. And we've been, to Jessica's point, really focused on trying to understand sources of where these things could be coming from. But it is a little, I guess for the PFAS, I guess we've always known that there's not much we can do except treat the water if that's the case. I think it's been worthwhile for us to look around and consider what the possible sources are, just so we can think about these for the future and how to protect the water supplies for the future. But not a whole lot of progress at the moment, just working on that document, and we'll try to bring that to you guys at a future meeting to discuss.
Excellent. All right. Anybody else have anything to contribute from working groups? Then let's turn to the minutes from our last meeting, October 26, right? Any edits or corrections, additions? All right, then I will move we accept the minutes of our last meeting, October 26, as skillfully compiled by Sue and company. Is there a second?
Second.
And let me ask for anyone who objects to that to indicate by raising their hand or making a sound. Hearing none, I'll declare that's unanimous. Our next meeting date, if we stay on this interval, will be December 7th. So if you can, take a look at your calendar and let me know if that's a big problem for anybody. And we would stick to our 7 p.m. schedule. Okay, again, hearing none. That'll be our next meeting date. And now any other business, old or new, not anticipated when we put the agenda together. Well, good. As I said, we've kind of earned our spurs this week in terms of hard work in town meeting and elsewhere. So I think the discussion was deep, and even though we didn't bring ourselves to a vote, it was very useful. I think the positions, at least I understand the positions much more clearly than I did coming into the meeting. So good work on that. And I have one technical question before we adjourn, which is, while I was looking at topographical maps from the town of Hamilton GIS, I created the groundwater protection district overlay, which can you see this? It includes this hatched area, which showed on your map, Scott. And then it has another color to include the Hamilton landfill and a lot of the wetland that's to the east. That color over here in the scale is not defined. Does anybody have a educated guess about what's going on here?
It looks somewhat similar to the superficial geology, the sand and gravel area. I've seen this as well, Steve, and it's something that we're trying to match up with other mapping, but that was my first estimation. Dan, I don't know if you're still with us, but maybe you want to comment on that as well.
I am still with you, but I am not sure if it's this entire purple area, it doesn't really look like that's all the sand and gravel, because I don't think it goes as far north and south. So see how it surrounds the pond. So I'm not sure. That's a good question. I don't have a good answer.
Okay. That's our homework assignment then for next time. Find out who did this overlay on the Hamilton GIS, where they got the data. All right, with that, I'll ask for the motion everyone waits to hear.
Move to adjourn.
Thank you,
Second,
Jessica. Seconded, moved, and if there's any objections, speak up. Otherwise, this task force stands in adjournment until December 7th. Happy Thanksgiving all.
have a nice Thanksgiving, everybody.
Giving.
Thank you, Dana and Scott.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks all.